Hey everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As you can tell by the title, today we're talking about light. When it comes to my growth approach, I'm kind of unscientific about it. I just really go with trial and error, and I just pay close attention to my plants and let plants tell me the story and whether or not they need more light or not. Now, of course, that's not really helpful for you guys. You probably want me to be able to quantify light a little bit better so you can kind of take a piece of my advice and incorporate it into your plant journey. Straight up, that will not happen. That will not happen right now, and that probably won't happen in the future either. And later on in the video, you'll probably understand why I'm so reluctant to actually measuring light. Today's video is sponsored by Mother. Mother is a grow light company producing these beautiful, sleek grow lights over here. Now, I've started using them over 1 year ago, so I feel like by now I'm in a position to really talk about them because, well, proof is in the pudding and the proof is really right behind me. All of these plants on this side of the room get very, very minimal light from a window right here. So they're really reliant on the grow lights to supplement the light and actually give them sufficient energy to produce new growth. We're going to talk about these slides in a little bit more detail in the second part of the video, but Mother has also given me a discount code, Sydney Plant Guy, and you can apply it using the link in the description, and then the discount is really based on whereabouts you are and what currency you're paying in. So I'll pop that into the description as well so you can look up, the discount you get based on your currency and what minimum order amount you require to actually hit before you can apply the discount. But more about that later on. Before we go into grow lights, I actually want to talk about light overall. First things first, by no means am I telling you that you need grow lights to make plants grow. That's actually quite the opposite. Plants in nature don't have any grow lights. They purely rely on sunlight. And that is totally fine. 90% of my plants rely on natural light only as well. It's really just this room and my IKEA cabinet that has grow lights. All my other plants, all of the plants in the living area, where I normally film all of my videos, are just relying on natural light. So by no means do you need a grow light. But if you're not blessed with a lot of natural light like I am, grow lights are a great way for you to supplement the light to still get your plants all of the light requirements that they need. So the question would be, how did I identify that most of my plants can just rely on natural light? The human eye is actually really, really bad at judging light levels, right? So sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to just judge based on your eyesight to, determine whether or not a spot will provide a plant with sufficient light. So I've really just been using a trial and error approach over the last 3 years, right? Or more specifically, 1.5 years that I've been living in this apartment over here. I really just put plants in a spot that I believe will give them sufficient light to grow, and then I just closely monitor the plant, and I let the plant tell me whether it's happy or not, and I let the plant tell me what it might need, right? So that way, I think I'm more in tune with my plants overall, and I actually learn something about the plants. I feel like the plants and I have somewhat of a connection. Now, of course, you can have a more scientific approach about it and measure light levels, understand what plant requires what light levels, and then adjust it accordingly. You can totally do that. I personally feel like that is something I would do if this was my business and I rely on my plants growing as fast as possible and as efficient as possible. But this is a hobby. I don't really appreciate that super scientific approach. Look, in my day job, I'm already working a lot with computers and rules and, a lot of operational step-by-step actions. So I really appreciate having the freedom and being a little bit more creative with my hobby, right? I do not want this to turn into like a job where I just tick boxes and make sure I'm hitting the right numbers. I think that's not an approach that I appreciate. That's not really part of the hobby that would be fun for me. But obviously you do you. But I've been asked a lot about, providing somewhat of a meter read so that you guys can have an idea of how much light I actually get. Now, I will not do that because I think it's super unrealistic to take a meter reading and tell you that that is the light level that my plants are getting. Light changes throughout the day, changes throughout the seasons, light changes with the weather, right? So really one reading wouldn't really be enough. You would really need to take a lot of readings at different times of the day, at different days with different weather conditions, and also throughout the whole year to get, an understanding of what is the actual average light across winter, summer, rainy days, super sunny days, early mornings, night, late afternoons, and so on. So if I would do that, let's say for a year, and I do a light reading in every corner of my apartment, let's say every 5 hours or so, and then I get you an average, you would have to do the same to then also determine whether your average matches my average. So I personally think that is way more work and very little fun compared to just paying a bit of attention to your plants and just understanding what they might want. So I'm very, very hesitant to put a quantitative measurement out there because I'm just worried that you guys are trying your hardest to hit a certain measurement and the measurement might just be wrong in the first place, right? So I'm a firm believer of trial and error. So if you came here for a specific number, I'm sorry to disappoint, but that won't really happen. And we talk about that a little bit more later on because overall measuring light levels is actually a very flawed technique. So let's go back to basics. What even is light? Why do we need light? And so on. Plants do photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is basically the process that the plant does or uses to take carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight and transforms it into sugars and oxygen. We're gonna inhale that oxygen, so happy days, and the sugars are basically just it's biomass for the plant to continue growing, right? There's obviously some biological reactions and so on, but I'm trying to keep it really easy today, right? This is not a PhD submission. This is really just trying to explain light as basic as possible while still giving you as much information you need to actually make a correct decision. The light comes to our plants in the form of photons. So photons are just small particles of light that are hitting our plants. So basically, we want to optimize the growth. So we want to optimize the photosynthesis a plant can do. So we need to understand what sort of photons or what sort of light really does the plant need to produce or to do photosynthesis as efficiently and effectively as possible. First of all, to do photosynthesis, your plant needs chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is what makes your plants green. That's why, for example, variegated plants where half the leaf is just white, the white part is completely useless, cannot contribute to photosynthesis, cannot contribute to growth, meaning that the plant is kind of naturally stunted in itself, right? Like you will never get a variegated plant to grow as large and as efficiently as a non-variegated plant if you give them the same conditions. So basically, we're all about optimizing our growth. So we want to understand what light does our plant want. Now, sunlight is made out of a lot of different wavelengths. But when it comes to the light that is useful for the plant to use, we're really talking about a wavelength between 400 and 700 nanometers. And I put a little graph up on screen over here where you can see the wavelength and then, the spectrum of light. Now, outside that 400 to 700 spectrum of light, there is, UV light and infrared light and so on. So this is all wavelengths that the sunlight gives up, but that's not necessarily part of the light that we want from grow lights because it's not necessarily useful for plant growth in itself. Now, UV can be useful because it can kill things like mold, right? So if you chuck something in the sun will most likely kill the mold, but it will also most likely burn the plant and burn us, right? So UV is not necessarily something that we need for our plants, specifically indoors. It would actually rather be dangerous for the plants and us, right? Specifically in Australia, for example, we have really high UV, which just burns plants really easily. So we need to be careful with like that really hot afternoon sun. We then also have infrared. Infrared basically produces heat. Now, yes, our plants need heat, but it is a very inefficient way of producing heat through infrared light within a grow light. There are much better ways of heating an environment for the plant's sake. So really, when we're talking about the useful wavelengths of light for growth, we're really talking about that 400 to 700 nanometers. Jesus, I said this was going to be not so scientific. I'm already exhausted. Now, within that spectrum between 400 and 700, we have different colored light that comes at different wavelength. Now, research has found out that plants specifically use the red and the blue spectrum of the light, whereas humans are more, or the human eye is mainly looking at or mainly perceiving the white or yellow, so the spectrum more in the middle. So basically, to make our plants grow, we want to make sure that the plant gets sufficient red and blue light, right? Everything in between is kind of optional, but we definitely want to make sure we optimize that red and blue wavelength. That's why you see these, and sorry if I offend anybody, but these absolutely hideous blue, purple grow lights, right? I mean, it might be okay if, your taste, you do whatever you do, but I couldn't think of anything worse than lighting my entire apartment in purple. Such a cold color, doesn't really give up nice light, and the plants basically look brown under that light, right? So I've opted for something full spectrum to mimic the sun and also to mimic the appearance of plants that they would have in the sun. But again, more about that in later on. Let's continue talking about light in general. So now that we know what plants want from light to actually optimize growth, let's understand how we can kind of quantify that, or somewhat quantify that, or let's basically go into reason why I'm hesitant to actually quantify that. The most common measurements you see out there for grow lights are really lumen, lux, and foot candle. Look, I'm just going to read out the definitions for you, and then let's go from there. I'll pop them on screen as well, so you don't need to remember. So lumen. Lumen is a measurement of the amount of brightness of a light bulb. And the light perceived by the human eye will be brighter for a light bulb that has a higher lumen. Lux. One lux, and lux is Latin for light, is the amount of illumination provided when one lumen is evenly distributed over an area of 1 square meter. So basically it just takes that lumen measurement, but it now applies it over a defined space. Right? But still, we're talking about light that is perceived by the human eye. And then foot candle is a unit of illuminance on a surface that is everywhere 1 foot from a uniform point source of light of 1 candle and equal to 1 lumen per square foot. All right, to be honest, that definition sounds shocking. Yeah, so it basically, while lumen measures the light that the actual light bulb gives up, foot candle and lux really measures the illuminance that that one light source has on a specific surface. So those are kind of the common measurements we get out there. But the fundamental flaw with all of these measurements is that they are measured based on human perception. Human perception is nothing like plants' perception. I'll pop in 2 graphs over here. The first one really shows you the light that the human eye kind of perceives, right? And what wavelength they're in. And then the second graph shows you what wavelength of light plants actually perceive. So you'll notice that the plants spike in red and blue, whereas the humans spike in the yellow-white bit in the middle. So if we are measuring something based on the human perception of light, we are essentially measuring how much white and yellow light there is, not how much red and blue light there is. But the red and blue light is really what's useful for the plant. So whatever we perceive as humans does not necessarily equal the same amount of growth for a plant. Don't get me wrong, it's still an okay indicator of how much light you actually get, but you could compare 2 light sources that give you the same lux, lumen, foot candle, but they might produce light at different wavelength. So, one light might be peaking in yellow and white, the other one might have the same measurement for yellow and white, but it's actually peaking in red and blue, which is just not really measured by the lux, lumen, and foot candle measurements. So fundamentally, when we're talking about measuring light potential for a plant, or how many photons a light gives up that are useful for the plant, we need to measure the red and the blue light, not the white and yellow light in that middle of that spectrum. That is possible, and that measure is called PPFD, photosynthetic photon flux density. Jesus. It basically measures the photosynthetically activated photons emitted by a light system per second. So the really important part is the photosynthetic, that word, right? Because that word implies that we're actually measuring red and blue, because those are the ones that actually, those are the protons that the plant uses for photosynthesis. Now, we can measure ppfd, but it's not really something that like your phone does or like your average light meter. There are actually some tools that, commercial growers or, grow light companies hopefully use to kind of understand how their grow light is performing. That's not really reasonable for the average user. I think the cheapest one starts at like $2,000, right? So I feel like that is a bit overkill to measure light, right? So basically, I hope all of the above made sense, and I hope you're still listening, and I hope it's not too boring for you. But basically, in a nutshell, the light that we can measure is very much based on human perception. Now, if I give you a reading that is based on my perception as a human, and you take it and apply it to your plants, that does not mean that you're going to be successful. So I don't want to give you a measurement that's potentially going to lead you in the wrong direction, or you're very desperately trying to achieve a certain measurement that's not even really indicative. That's not really indicating great growth potential in the first place, right? So to me, it makes no sense. I much rather encourage you to actually pay attention to your plants, get to know your plants, understand the signs your plants gives up if they need more light. Usually it would be leggy growth, right? So very large internodal spacing, or it would be smaller leaves. It would be maybe, hi Brad, it would be maybe sending out runners and so on. Those are signs that a plant, or the lack of growth, those are signs that plants give up to show you that, hey, I might need more light, and I much rather have you pay attention to that than walk around blindly behind a phone just trying to hit a certain measurement. But that's just my approach, and that's why I will never give you a quantitative light measurement based on my environment over here. So apologies in advance. It is what it is. All right. So this is pretty much all about light, right? And at this stage, whether that light comes from a grow light or from the sun doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's talk about grow lights. I want to be super transparent with you guys. These grow lights that I've been using, first of all, I didn't pay for them. They gifted them to me last year, so I can really try them. Now, after 1 year of trying them, I feel comfortable talking to you about them a little bit more. I'm a firm believer that you can't just take something, use it for a day, and then talk about it. I really put the time into trying these and giving them plenty of time, or giving my plants plenty of time to show me whether or not they like these lights. So now, 1 year later, I feel comfortable talking to you about these grow lights because proof is in the pudding. I've got the receipts to actually show you that this is working, and not just telling you about it because I'm getting paid for it, right? But I want to be open and transparent with you. These grow lights are not cheap. The main reason why I started being in touch with them is because they are by far the most aesthetically pleasing grow lights that I can find out there. You know me by now, I'm all about my aesthetics. My entire goal about my plant journey is to make my plants be part of my apartment, decorate my apartment with plants, meaning that I want my plants to look good at all times, meaning I want this setup that my plants are in to look good at all times. Yes, you can totally put like a growth tent in your living room, like, one of these with reflective insides, and chuck like 800 grow lights in there, giving up blue, purple light. To me, that entirely defeats the purpose. You don't even get to see the plants that you're growing. I want my plants to be in the environment that I live in, and I want them to look good, and I want to feel comfortable here. I don't want to feel like I'm in an industrial style greenhouse. So I wanted them to look nice, and I mean that design, like that really sleek black aluminium design is beautiful, and they are just so tiny, right? Like this is the base. It has this teeny tiny base. And because I am very limited with space in my apartment over here, or at least specifically in this room, you can see kind of the corner of the bed over here. So I really don't have much space over here. Usually my fan is positioned right behind these grow lights as well. So I have very limited space, probably a little shelf that wide for my grow light to sit on. So these were perfect because they have this tiny footprint, plus they're vertical. My plants grow vertical. That's a match, right? Because once we actually understand what we want from our light, we want that blue and red wavelengths, then it actually gets to the next step. Well, how are we taking that light and projecting it onto our plants? If I would have a spotlight that spotlight would pretty much just light up the top leaf, and all the leaves below would get shaded by that first leaf. Also, because the light would come from the top, all of the leaves will slowly start pointing upwards. Because I have this linear setup, all of my leaves get beautiful light and they don't shade each other. Plus, all of my leaves start pointing forward, precisely where I want them to point, because that's the side of the plant that I see and I want them to look visually appealing to me. Alright, so this is really what's drawn me into these lights, and that's really the only light, or these are the only ones that I really found that give me that beautiful design. Now, design is just one thing. Obviously, it needs to also have the functionality. And that's where I put the last year of testing into place, right? I wanted to see, does this actually work? And again, I'm not a super sciencey person. So, yep, okay, if you read through any Grow Lights website, of course they're going to promise you the world and tell you that it's going to be amazing. But proof is in the pudding. I wanted to set them up. I wanted to use them for a decent amount of time throughout different seasons and so on, and see if there's any sort of signs that my plants would be unhappy. But quite clearly, all of the plants on this side of the room, the ones that actually get the grow light, are actually growing much more than the plants on this side of the room that are just relying on the natural light. Another reason why I've got these grow lights as well is that obviously all of the light is coming from one side, meaning that these leaves will slowly start turning to one side. But because this light source kind of evens it out a little bit, all leaves are actually starting to point forward again rather than sideways. You want to be part of it? You're supervising, okay? Make sure that he doesn't say anything wrong. Now, I mentioned before, these are really expensive lights. So what is it about these lights that actually makes them so expensive? I asked myself, so I gave them a call, and I wanted to find out from the company itself why these products are sold at a higher price than some of the comparable products that are out there. Now, it really comes down to a couple of things. First of all, the quality of products. This is an aluminium casing, which is much more expensive than having a plastic casing. But what that casing does, it actually helps wick away it helps distribute the heat. Now, these lights are obviously LED grow lights, and each LED is producing heat. Now, that heat, if not funneled away from the LEDs, is actually going to start bouncing back and forth between the LED and the little layer that the LED has on top, which will eventually, just bouncing back and forth, the layer that is on top of the LED will start bubbling up from all of the heat that builds up because the heat is not, funneled away from it. That bubbling up of that layer is actually causing the light to be reflected back inwards rather than being reflected outwards, which means that over time, if the LED board in your grow light isn't cooled sufficiently, then the LEDs will just get weaker and weaker and weaker, which means that, yes, you might have bought a cheaper product, but it might lose some of the light capacity that it actually has over the years and eventually will break overall, and then you just need to buy another one and another one. That the mother grow lights are avoiding that problem is by having that aluminium casing and like a design that actually helps funnel the heat from the LED board into the casing. That's why the casing is hot. It's on purpose. The casing is hot so that the LED board is not hot. If you touch your grow light and it's not hot, that means that the LED board is where all of the heat is kind of being condensed in, which means that your LEDs will suffer over time. Because of that design, they're actually so confident they're giving you a 4-year warranty on your LED board. So if your LED board breaks within 4 years, then they're going to replace it to you for free. And they're actually saying that LED board should last for 10 years. For 8 to 10 years. And once the LED board breaks, you can actually just take the LEDs in themselves out and just slide a new LED board into the aluminium casing. And that replacement LED board comes at a fraction of the price of the whole grow light. So essentially, you should have this grow light for eternity. And just every 8 to 10 years, you might have to switch out the LED board. So that's obviously much better for the environment because you're not throwing out electronics every couple of years and so on. But also it gives you the confidence that these grow lights are actually here to last, One thing that my mom taught me is if you want something, don't opt for the cheaper option. it's gonna break and you're gonna hide it, and then you're probably gonna buy the cheap option 2-3 times until you realize that, damn it, I should have just gone with the quality proper product in the first place. So you actually end up spending way more money than if you just opt for the good product in the first place. But that's just a lesson that my mom taught me. Obviously, you can do with your money whatever you want. That aluminium casing is also dust-proof and waterproof. Now, not waterproof to the extent that you should go for a swim with it, but if you operate this grow light in a really high humidity environment, like a grow tent, a greenhouse, and so on, and it might be surrounded by 80, 90, almost to 100% humidity, right? Then that waterproof casing is just going to make sure that no water is actually going to get into the electrics part of it, right? So meaning that it won't break, first of all, but also it's not a safety hazard if operated in a in a more humid environment. Another reason why I'm not necessarily super trusty, if you get these really cheap grow lights off of like Wish or something like that, you know, they're not necessarily produced in the most quality, like they're not necessarily produced with quality in mind. They're really produced with cheap prices in mind. So I'm not too sure how I feel about using them in a potential high humidity environment and potentially causing risks, like safety concerns. Another thing that they do to actually increase the safety of them is they give you an adapter that transforms the volts that come out of your wall plug into a safe 24 volts. So it transfers the electricity to just 24 volts that then flow into the grow light, making it a safe voltage to use in an indoor setting, specifically where it's wet. Another aspect of these grow lights that I really like, and it's something that was really important to me when selecting grow lights that I want to use, is the actual color that these grow lights give off. I mentioned before that I'm absolutely not a fan of these blue and red lights, you know. I just think it makes it look really hideous. Makes the whole display look hideous. What's the point in my opinion? So I wanted to make sure that the light that the lights give up is a warm white, right? I wanted to look natural and I wanted to look homey. I didn't want it to look like a commercial growing facility. So these grow lights are full spectrum, so giving you all of the spectrum between the 400 and 700 nanometers. It's peaking in red and blue, as you can tell by the graph up here, but it still also has all of the other wavelengths in between, making sure that the light looks visually appealing to the human eye, but still give up all of the wavelength that the plants actually need to optimize photosynthesis. These LEDs are also the highest quality LEDs you can really get. They have a CRI. CRI stands for Color Rendering Index of 96. And that's basically the CRI is measured how colors are observed. So if the CRI would be 100, there would be zero difference between the colors being observed in natural conditions, so via the sun, or those, right? So there's only a really small difference between the true color perceived based on natural light and the color perceived based on these grow lights. So these are LEDs or similar LEDs with a similar CRI are used in like museums to light, you know, famous paintings, so that when we go and visit and look at these paintings, we can actually perceive the color the way that they're intended to be. If you, for example, use blue and red lights, everything that they light up is gonna look brown, right? So you're not having this true to nature color rendering index, essentially making your plants look a different color than they actually are. So this way I actually get to appreciate the true color of these leaves at all times, and it just makes it look nice. Right, so I really wanted to know why they are selling their products at a much higher price tag than some of these other grow light companies. And you know, after I've spoken to them and kind of learned about these things, it makes total sense to me to pay a little bit more money for a higher quality product. But ultimately, what you do with your money is obviously your choice. I'm definitely not here to tell you need to get these grow lights, but I'm just here to tell you what I really appreciate about these grow lights and why I chosen to work with these grow lights. Now, Mother has given me a discount code. It's just Sydney Plant Guy. So you get a discount. The discount is different depending on what currency you pay in. So I'll pop that all in the description. And unfortunately, there is a minimum spend that you need to reach before the discount actually applies. So there is a link. You need to click on that link and then enter my code Sydney Plant Guy if you want to apply that discount code before you continue shopping. So before I wrap up, there's actually one other thing that I wanted to mention. Now, obviously, there's also it's also important how close you've got the grow lights to your plants. Now, these are specifically designed to be used in an indoor setting and kind of fit everywhere. So these are not so strong that you need to put them very far away. You can actually use them quite close to your plants without burning your leaves. Right? So they only operate on 32 watts. The large one at least. So this is the plant spectrum 32. 32 stands for 32 watts. They also have one that is half the size, which conveniently operates on half the watts, right? So watts is the energy that a product uses. It is safe to use in this environment, and you will never have to worry about actually burning your plants. But depending on the species that you grow, they actually have some guidelines on the website as to how far away you should have these from your plants. Now, they are about, I think, 60 centimeters away from the closest plant, up to like a meter away from the plant that is farthest away over there. So they're not super, super close, and they're still working a treat, right? But obviously, the closer you get, the stronger the light will be, the more photons, the more photosynthesis, the more growth, and so on. But I found that to be like a decent distance for it to still work while actually increasing the surface that the light hits. Alrighty, so let's wrap it up with a little conclusion. So overall, light is probably the most important factor when it comes to plant growth. It's basically their food. If there's no light, your plants will not grow. So light is not necessarily the same for everybody, right? Humans perceive light in a different way than plants. To optimize the photosynthesis a plant can do, we really want to make sure that a plant gets that red and blue spectrum light. You can achieve that just through natural light, or you can achieve that through grow lights. Just make sure that any grow light that you get has that blue and red spectrum peaking. Yes, you can measure light levels. You can use lux, foot candle, lumen, whatever you want. But keep in mind that these measurements are mainly based on human perception. So they might not necessarily be an indicator for the growth potential of your plants with that sort of light. I think that's kind of it. I hope this was valuable to you. It was definitely valuable to me, having to do a little bit more research into it to really understand the science behind light. So I personally learned quite a lot from making this video. All right, if you're still watching and I haven't bored you to death with all of the scientific stuff in this video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it informative, but still easy to understand. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you could hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a nice comment. And I'll see you next time. Take care. I want to eat you. You're so cute.